afternoon to a very good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to this roundtable which we have organized. Dhruva and FICCI have organized today to talk about what is a very important subject, a very topical subject, and a very contentious subject of trade barriers that have emerged in the recent past. The new FTAs which have got signed, the US tariffs. And we're going to, over the next hour or so, talk about this subject. We have with us Rohan Shah. Rohan is an acknowledged authority, a senior advocate, rated several times as India and Asia's most influential lawyer, somebody who practices in Mumbai High Court, in the Supreme Court, and has represented both the government as well as some of the largest business houses in various matters, not necessarily restricted to taxation, and also represented the government of India in a variety of forums relating to trade. If I may dare say, there are not very many people in the industry who can talk about trade and negotiation of FTA, where things are, how things move, and what are the intricacies behind him, who would be as qualified as Rohan is. So welcome, Rohan, and delighted to have you with us. Right. We then have Anup Mehta. Anup Bhai is Chairman and Managing Director of Mohit Diamonds. But more important, apart from the fact that he has been in diamond and jewelry business for almost 4 decades now, he has been the president of Bharat Diamond Bourse. He is on the executive committee of the World Federation of Diamond Bourses. And very recently, he has been appointed as a chairman of International Gemological Institute. Again, very happy to have you with us.
Pleasure.
And then finally, we have Premal. Premal will join us in a little bit. His flight got delayed, but he should be joining us in the next about 15 odd minutes. Premal has been associated with apparel and trade industry for almost 4 decades. His company, KT Corporation, is a manufacturer and exporter of garments. He has been the chairman of Apparel Export Promotion Council and works on a variety of committees with the government of India, and in the field of textile is an acknowledged authority and very well respected. The idea today is that we have a subject matter expert as Rohan, who's going to talk about the aspects, legal aspects relating to FTA, how negotiations happen, etc. And then we have Anup and Premal, who are going to talk about the practical implications that these two industries, the gem and jewelry industry and the textile industry in particular, have faced as a result of the US tariffs, etc. The idea in the next 1 hour is to blend both theory and practice. Theory to understand what really is the lay of the land, what does it mean, but more important then to look at how are people rejigging their supply chain, what is happening on the ground. As they say, hope cannot be a strategy. So while all of us are waiting with bated breath to see the outcome of the US representative who has come down to India and who's in Delhi currently, and hopefully we are all hoping that the negotiations between the two governments, USA and India, reach some fruition, and the sanctions, so to say, which have been placed on us are lifted, and we don't have to pay a 50% tariff, which we currently need to. But until then, what is it that one needs to do, etc. So with that background, if I can begin with you, Rohan, and of course, I have this pleasant task of only asking questions, which makes my job very easy. So, Rohan, if we begin, FTAs have not been uncommon. India has negotiated several of them. In fact, the India-UK FTA, which has been such an important FTA, is something which we found so important that the Prime Minister flew down to UK just to sign it, and both the UK Prime Minister and the Indian Prime Minister sort of put it as a historic thing. And yet somewhere all of that got overshadowed by what happened later on. in USA. I thought you could just give us a quick background on the negotiation of FTAs. How do things move? How do you see the UK FTA and the practical opportunities that it affords? And then we'll move to the contentious subject of the US tariffs.
Okay. But thank you, Dinesh, and thank you for inviting us today. So, I think one good way of looking at the very enhanced importance of FTAs today is probably to sort of look very quickly at the history of multilateral trade, the history of global trade, right? And quite honestly, if we trace that history from 1945, in 80 years, we've actually come back to the very point on which we started in 1945. So 1945 was really the watershed year where many of the developed nations, and particularly the US and Europe, took the lead to say that we need to move to a trading system, which is a multilateral trading system. And that trading system should be founded on what they called a rule-based multilateral trading system, under which every participant was accountable to the other. And if there were disputes between the participants, there was a regular forum in which such disputes could be sorted. Now, the whole purpose of suggesting this was that developed nations and developing nations had never sat in a room to negotiate trade issues because the negotiating powers were so unequal. But if US and Europe wanted to open up the developing consumer markets all over the world, they needed this, right? So the starting of this was the gaps in terms of goods, and then we got to the services, and somewhere midstream in 95 we got to the WTO, which meant 143 nations came together in one banner. And the manner in which the developing countries positioned to the the developed countries positioned to the developing countries to say you should come on board is they offered them 4 sweeteners which were critical. The first of this was what we call the most favored nation treatment, which means even if you are Ghana, even if you are Philippines, in the multilateral system, your negotiating power is equivalent to if Germany was speaking to US. So we will elevate your negotiating power by saying everybody comes into the most favored nation status. The second is the national treatment, saying no matter what nation you come from in terms of being an exporter, I will treat you exactly like I treat a domestic manufacturer in my economy. The third thing they said is, we'll give you what is called special and differential treatment. So if, for example, tariffs had to be dismantled by the developed nations by within 5 years, they would give a 20-year lead to the developing nations to say, you take 20 years to sort of come here. And lastly, they said, everything is capable of going to dispute. So if US acts irrationally with Ghana, for example, you go to WTO dispute settlement and Ghana can make US accountable. And the strength of these 4 factors brought everybody in. And therefore, the concept of local markets changed to say, the world is my local market. And obviously, the biggest beneficiaries were the mega corporations from US and Europe. While this system subsisted, the first signs that we saw that this will come apart from being multilateral trade was in 2017, where dispute settlement at WTO has 2 stages. There is a panel and there is an appellate body. US and other countries had an inherent right to nominate members to the appellate board. In 2017, US for the first time said, I will not nominate. The fact that they didn't nominate effectively meant that over a period of time by 2019, the appellate board became dysfunctional because they could not form the quorum that was required. And the biggest security for the developing nation really got taken away by the factor that you could no longer make the more important trading partners accountable. Now, guess who was president of US in 2017? And it was Mr. Trump. So the first sign that we had globally that we are somewhere going to move away from this cycle which started in 1945, was 2017.
The settled framework was getting undone.
Yeah, so they took away the fourth pillar, which is dispute resolution on equal terms, and the other three pillars became shaky. And that turns around from 2017 to where we are today, that the multilateral system has collapsed. And now we are back to saying that either sovereign rules prevail, that means you want to come to my country, my rules prevail, and the only exception will be a bilateral agreement. And as a result, now bilateral agreement becomes the pivot of global trade, and we've taken 80 years to traverse this journey, encouraged by Europe and US.
Well, that's very, very interesting perspective to understand really what goes on. But Rohan, as you said, bilateralism is now the force. And each country has its own needs. If India is negotiating with New Zealand, New Zealand is interested in sending dairy here, and India is interested in doing something else out there. And therefore, each nation has its own priorities. And before we get into the concept of UK and USA, you have been part of many of these discussions. If it briefly you could share how these priorities play really, and what comes into fore when one is really negotiating an FTA.
Yeah. So as you sort of rightly mentioned, negotiating strategy will vary nation to nation, and essentially it's about your concerns, right? But let's look at it broadly and let's just focus on goods. All goods which are imported or exported fall within one chapter of the HSN. So the negotiation typically goes chapter by chapter in the context of the HSN. So let's take New Zealand as an example, right? So when you are negotiating with New Zealand, there are two things New Zealand is concerned about. What is their manufacturing and export capability in how many chapters? And where do they need goods to come in to satisfy their consumers? So what will condition their approach? What they want to export, they will want zero tariff access. What they need to bring in, which they have no capacity, they will allow at zero. But what you want to send to them, where they have manufacturing capacity, you will get a higher tariff. So that's the typical approach. So if you look at New Zealand and we sort of talk about dairy, they will want three things. First, there should be no standards in India which will prevent them sending in dairy products. Two, you can't have any testing protocols which will delay them forever. Three, the tariff should be the lowest. So their position will be, this is what I want to ensure. We, on the other hand, may have a sensitivity to milk, but we may not have a sensitivity to cheese. So what we would be willing to say is, we'll allow cheese to come in and this is the rate we are willing to give you. And in terms of standards, etc., these are the relaxations, if any. Now, here it's pretty simple. Their ambition is more limited. But transpose this to assuming we were doing with Japan. Japan's manufacturing capability is across all 97 chapters. Their consuming capability is also across all 97 chapters. But with Japan, you will still have holes. So in Japan, you can still define their interests vis-a-vis our interests. But the moment you do this as US or China, China makes not only every chapter, it makes every subheading. It consumes every subheading. We consume every subheading. We probably make in an efficient manner about 62% of the subheadings. So now you sort of understand that the give and take here is far more complex than what would happen with the New Zealand.
Agreed. And within that, going back to where we began, the India, UK FTA, and I thought I'd just get your thoughts, Rohan, on how do you see this FTA where we had almost 99% of the items being available to India to export at either a nil or a de minimis duty, things hurting over a period of time. What does this present as by way of an opportunity to Indian industries?
Yeah, I think, in the whole noise of what's happening with the US, the quite remarkable achievement in forming what we have as an FTA with UK hasn't received the spotlight it should have received. As you sort of rightly put it, focused on goods, India access really 99% of tariff lines we will go in with almost no tariff, right? Uh, the question for us, therefore, is not tariff. It's now about competitiveness. Do we have the products of the quality, the timeliness, and the cost that they will appeal to the UK market, right? Now, what you also see in this agreement is a lot of areas which are otherwise unexplored, other than only goods, effectively become available. But look purely from the point of Indian exporters. Obviously, there are gains to be made in the textiles, gem and jewelry, leather goods, engineering goods, a series of things where in chapters and tariff lines we will have far, far better access. And the good thing is, a lot of this is also likely to get mirrored with the EU. So this replicable, almost reflective opportunity will get created in the EU. Equally, we have given them some innovative things which would cause them to give us this tariff at zero. So for the first time, we have a chapter on UK companies being able to participate in public procurement by Indian ministries and Indian departments. So what is typically government procurement, which could have been written in a tender, which would have sort of had conditions to say only Indians in some form or manner, you now really have to open that up. And in a manner, while UK industry gets a look into that, we reciprocally get the sort of tariffs we get. We, on services, have a series of relaxations which have now come up, which will sort of ensure that at least on movement of people, subject to immigration, we will have preferential access. So a lot of situations where, today the need of UK is everything from nurses to doctors to salespeople on the retail shop floor, to chefs, that sort of outward movement you will see will also pick up very, very significantly. So if you see this one FTA, I think three things stand out. One, for goods, we are very well positioned. For services, we have open doors, but we may need reskilling on some. And there are many aspects touched on which have not been touched on where we have opened up things. So, for example, here significantly, they can send in certain food products. Previously, India was in a manner thought of as not amenable to any food products coming in, or this public procurement. So, in that manner, I think it's really a watershed FTA. And the fact that it has the opportunity to get reflected and replicated with other countries, again, just augurs very well for us.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Rohan. And I have seen practically clients rejig their supply chain instead of using Rotterdam, Netherlands as a hub, sort of start to relook at whether UK can be the hub for entire Europe. And we are also in the midst of this whole negotiation with EU. And again, if you are able to replicate what we did with UK, with EU, then you would have a frontier which may not necessarily be as large a consuming front as US is, but nonetheless makes up for quite a bit of gaps which otherwise we would see having regard to what's happening in the USA.
Dinesh, I think you hit on two very important issues. See, one situation that we will be concerned about is not just size of market, but predictability of market. That is what all stakeholders will be concerned about, particularly promoters and investors, right? So, I could today manage through some stroke of luck the best trade deal with the US. But can I say that it will last even if it is signed? The answer will always be, it will be always unpredictable day by day. The European opportunity, the UK opportunity gives you a very, very safe, predictable market. The other is, does it in a manner offer you opportunities, whether research development, whether value addition, to treat this, which is a credible jurisdiction, as an ability for you to address other markets. And that opportunity, again, I mean, some clients had come in to say, planning the future, which is the best way for me to plan if I had to invest in manufacturing. Obviously, in India, we want that investment rupee and that investment job. But as a business with global ambitions, I would say look seriously at Africa. Because Africa, in its global economic indices, is so low. that nobody will ever target them for the next 20 years. So, as you look at UK or the Middle East, you will look at also options of this type where the likelihood of tariff upheavals is going to be minimal, probably non-existent.
So you're making 2 points, Rohan. First is that India needs to develop the skill sets which is amenable to taking advantage of the FTAs which have been signed. We need to be alive to these opportunities because I think it has taken some bit of time, and as you rightly said, USA disrupted the entire thought process of what UK is offering and what could now EU offer when we sign. And second point you're making is that we have no option but to broad base. Even assuming we set right what has gone wrong thus far, you have to broad base your marketplace, and that's something which is very, very critical. Yep, agreed. Let me move on from there to the US tariffs. The first hit, of course, was a 25% itself, which was inconsistent with what the neighboring countries got, and in an export market, a 6, 7, 8% can make all the difference that one can think of. And then moving on with the additional 25% as punitive for Russian imports. I thought first, how do you see this entire thing? India was among the earliest of the bloc in terms of negotiation, and somewhere along the line, we have lost sight, or we couldn't cross the finishing line. And then now you hear not only about not importing oil from Russia, but you hear things like India permitting import of corn, genetically modified foods, etc., etc. Our local requirement that we protect the dairy, the farmers, the MSME. How do you see all of this, Jelly?
It's obviously a very, very volatile and unpredictable situation from day to day. See, I think the pivot of this is you are really back to the era of sovereignty. If I am a sovereign and I am the emperor of this sovereign, then my diktat of Farman is the only thing which matters in the world, right? So, what have you seen play out in this era? So one is, what we are talking of, the normal customs levies. Okay. The second is what we call that 25%, which sort of first came in, which was the expected, and the further 25%, which was punitive. So if you see the bouquet of what Trump is using, the one is customs levies. Okay. The second is he uses his powers under enactment which empowers him that if in international economic
I'll just stop here.
emergency.
Premal, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we already introduced you, and Rohan is taking us through some of the FTAs, and we just come to USA. We'll invite you in very soon. Yeah.
So my apologies for being late. The flight got a little delayed.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you for.
Yeah.
So, like I was saying, so one is he has the normal customs tariff, right? Then he has an act called IEEMA. IEEMA allows him to bring in an additional tariff, the trigger for which is economic security. Then he has a third one, which is the section 232, which is a tariff he can bring for national security. And then he has a 301, which he can use because there is trade distortion. Okay. So let's look at how each of these play out. 301 till now has been targeted at China, but it is also used in the context of some other countries, primarily on the basis that you are reverse engineering my IP. So I can trigger that. His 232 he has invoked in different scenarios, saying national security, right? He has already invoked the IEMA, which effectively we are suffering. Now he has a combination of all these three. His powers under IEMA, the two lower courts in US have said he's misused the provision. That issue now pends in the US Supreme Court. But from his perspective, he can trigger anything, either under IMA or 232 or 301. And let's see how he's used it. So one question to ask is, if I have an FTA, am I safe? Nothing else will come. He has an FTA with Japan and Korea, but selected products is still targeted under something else. He has a levy on Brazil for ill-treating their former president. So that he claims is part of what comes in terms of his national security, economic security.
And he has threatened that if you levy digital tax on my technology companies, I will use tariff. So as you said, I am the sovereign and I decide what I want to do.
Yeah. Now, he targets us in terms of Russian oil. It's now well documented that their imports are probably greater than Russia. China's imports are definitely greater. So the situation here is that being in the FTA is a situation where we can say that we've hopefully landed in a more secure space. And rather than not having an FTA, we should have an FTA. But is having an FTA the basis to believe that nothing else in terms of bad news is coming? Sadly, that also is clearly disproven. Even with an FTA, you could get bad news really almost from anywhere. And if you see his declaration, firstly, advisable, he calls these trade deals because an FTA would have to really replicate WTO standards. So this is my deal. And every declaration is modified, capable of being modified by me, rescinded by me, reintroduced by me, or enhanced by me. So we are really now in a situation where the entire policy making is unitary to one individual. And how he will react on a day, there is no certainty. So we have to deal with the inherent uncertainty, which I hope will abate once we have a trade deal, but which may not necessarily abate if we have a trade deal.
So what you're saying is that trade deal is an absolute necessity, but not an imperative to say everything is hunky-dory. There are still other measures which can come in, and those measures need to be taken care of. And why don't I invite at this stage Anup first, if I could ask you this question. USA has been a reasonably large market for the diamond and for the jewelry industry in particular. And it would, I think, not be right to say that with a 50% levy, there's no way you can survive and be competitive there. How is your industry looking at the whole thing?
So our industry is finding other ways of sending the. We have two. If you carve out our industry into two major sections, one is loose diamonds and one is finished jewelry, studded jewelry as we call it. So studded jewelry always had a 6.5% duty over there. So they found a way whereby if the gold comes in, the product comes in from the US under the custom HS code for studded for jewelry, and that HS code doesn't change when I stud it and polish it and finish it and send it back, then only 6.5% duty applies. So 50% tariff really is not hitting the jewelry industry directly. Of course, indirectly, the all costs to be added because you have to have the jewelry product first of all cast in the US. You have to have a customs ruling from the US that yes, this will not be applicable in each individual name because it's not blanket permission for everybody. And it just adds additional costs, but it's still better than the 50%, let's put it that way. And just to give you a perspective, so USA imports roughly about $12 billion worth of jewelry, and India is about 25% of that. So it's a large share for the jewelry exports from here. Now we come to loose diamonds. So as most people know that 14 out of 15 diamonds are cut and polished in India. The final cutting and polishing is done in India. We directly export, USA consumes about 50% of all these diamonds, either in the form of loose or through jewelry, which I just spoke about. And our share over there in the jewelry is 25% and in is 45% in loose diamonds. So what the US used to do is pick up the loose diamonds, ship those loose diamonds to various factories in China, Turkey, and elsewhere, have their jewelry made in Italy or wherever, and get those pieces back. So that is the big question over there.
So the supply chain is being rejigged.
Is being rejigged.
So you're saying that, as I understand, you have loose diamonds going into some of the countries which have got a much lower rate.
Mexico being one of them, there's only 3%. And then you have, of course, you have Dubai and Turkey, which is at 10%. So those are being raised. So it's, I mean, so the big guys can maybe still manage to do this because they have offices abroad, they have clients, obviously bigger clients. But when it comes to the smaller people and the cheaper goods and smaller goods, it's getting more and more difficult.
So those who are smaller, as our Prime Minister says, MSME is the hardest hit. They are the ones who are suffering.
Yeah.
The larger ones are able to send out diamonds, get whatever processing is required to be done in those respective countries.
In Mexico and various other, and they can even set up shop and set up factories to do the same.
Correct. And then send it out.
Yeah,
And
so at the end of the day, it would be less than 50%, but it still adds a lot of costs.
but allows you still to be a bit more competitive.
Little bit more competitive, and this tariffs came in at a time when, you know, the diamond and the jewelry sector has been going in through a slum since 22. And, you know, before the tariffs, we were seeing that this would be one of the few, after 3 years, you'd see some growth coming back to the industry,
Mhm.
but that has been knocked up.
Got it. Thank you. And Premal, if I could come to you, your industry in variety of forms, whether it is textiles, garments, etc. USA has been a very, very major market. How is this impacting your industry, and how is the industry responding to it?
The impact is quite severe. Our garments and textiles exports account for roughly about $35-36 billion, out of which US is almost 10.5-11 billion dollars. So it's almost a third of our exports. US business has been relatively large, relatively easy because they're big format stores. It's something that's a perfect fit for the Indian garment manufacturer all these years. So this came as a shock. And don't forget that there were already duties ranging from 15 to 22% on our apparel already. So when you have this 50%, it almost is 65 to 70% is the effective rate of duty in the United States, which is backbreaking. And being bulk items, it's not possible to cart them from country to country, like what Anup said, you know, because this is a completely different ball game. So it's been a big blow, and we were blindsided. We never expected this. We were very hopeful when the Prime Minister visited Mr. Trump, and he had made no, two ways about it, that he preferred Trump to Biden. So when Trump got elected, we were all very bullish. We set up capacities. We said, okay, El Dorado is here. But then this has come as a big, big shock. But things seem to be settling down. But when you have a mercurial leader, until something is finally signed, sealed, one can never know. And in respect of how our members are dealing with it, it's quite a disaster. The importers are simply Americans being Americans, although it's their president who's put the duties. Anywhere from 15 to 25% is the discounts that are being asked for from the Indian vendors to clear the current inventory. And if we don't do that, then it's, you know, we are semi-perishable commodity. If we don't mix, and these are all Christmas pickings, you know. So if we don't do that, then we lose everything. So between 15 and 25% is the discounts, but the goods have moved. So, you know, you don't really see too much effect on the ground level just as yet. But if things don't really normalize in the next month or so, then future bookings will be very, very greatly impacted. And once these orders go out of the country, then to bring them back is going to be a big problem, because garments are produced roughly in 50 countries of the world. So it's not rocket science. And countries like Bangladesh and all are quietly laughing their way to the bank currently, you know. So we just hope that what signs we have seen in the last few days, these will sort of become more solid and something good will come about finally.
You made a distinction, Premal, that unlike diamond and jewelry, which can sort of be redone in some other country, textiles and garments is difficult. But one does hear, Premal, about people maybe using Turkey as a place where you can do some value addition, send out. Are you seeing any such examples really in practice?
Not really, because there are country of origin norms which also need to be taken into account. You got to do two-step process in a particular country. And yes, there could be some fly-by-night who could try the odd shortcut, but the established exporters and the established buyers overseas will not go into something like that. And because when you have to ship the container from here, unload the container, unload every piece, do whatever work you have to do, and reship it back, it's not that easy. This reminds me of the days way back in the early 80s when MFA agreements were there and India was governed by quotas, So that time goods were moving from country to country, but since then things have been stable. But the bigger boys, as Anup said, even the bigger boys are moving lot of their orders to Bangladesh, to Vietnam, um, because they have factory setups in these countries. It's the MSMEs and the SMEs which make the backbone of the apparel industry, who have nowhere to go. So the impact is much more on the MSMEs and the SMEs.
Thank you, thank you. So, Ron, coming back, two things. One is there are places where supply chain can be rigid. Uh, the the more sophisticated the product, if you're into engineering, there's no way that you can redo it. And again, the ability to chain a supply chain in a very short period of time, you don't know. And again, then you are always wondering, and you are hoping that India is able to reach a settlement, and therefore you don't want to incur that extra expenditure of whatever relocating elsewhere, etc., etc. So a few questions coming. A, the fact is that there is a real pain. The fact is, as Premal is mentioning, we have MSME, which is hit very hard. There is a degree of unemployment coming in. I'm sure there'll be a consequential impact on the banking sector, etc. Uh, Two questions. One is, any thoughts on what the industry should be doing? And more important, anything that you think the government should be doing to ease this pain? Other than, of course, quickly negotiating and closing agreements.
Yeah, so firstly, as both Anubhay and Premal mentioned, the options really are available to the larger players. The medium and small are really just stuck, right? Now, even when the larger players are doing this, I think that nimbleness or those sense of opportunity which they are accessing, let's not forget that while it benefits that individual business, from an India perspective, there is a erosion in terms of A, job opportunity, and B, that much value addition had migrated out of India. So as an individual business, I can be nimble. But in the context of India, that's a loss. The second is, different products, country of origin varies. In gem and jewelry, essentially they're saying if your HS code remains the same, you're fine. But there are other industries where value addition is critical. There are other industries where, for example, in metals, they'll say you must pour in a certain country. There is the two-step process in textile. So country of origin and satisfying country of origin is important. And the third thing to remember, even if you pivot out, there is a set of provisions called circumvention, where if you have changed your business model to get around a tariff and therefore have in a way window dressed your country of origin, then under circumvention, you will not only restate the tariff, but there will be penalties and other penal actions. So how you go about it is sort of critical. Relevant to our businesses who stay here and value add here, I think the four things which seem almost self-apparent. One, wherever we have a import dependence on raw materials, we really need to work overtime in terms of ensuring that cost of sourcing critical raw materials is rationalized as much as possible. All aspects of mobility of raw materials and finished goods, time taken, cost taken, government can effectively step in to really see how that can be addressed. There will have to be some amount of quality upgradation. That is critical. That needs to be focused even in the long run. This one central issue of ease of doing business for the Indian businessman invested in India. Like one of the biggest issues in the context of exports is you are promised all sorts of subsidies. Well, that's not the right word, but export benefits. You are said GST refunds. You are said this will come to you. The time, process, and cost to get that into your pocket, and the fact that a lot of it is litigious. I think that as a chapter in our economic history, we must shut. If you're an exporter, every facilitation should come to you into your bank account and at your doorstep, really with no controversy and certainly no litigation.
No, I would agree with you there. And that's where, so one is, of course, you talk about ease of doing business, procurement, etc. And do you think this is the right time for the government to step in to look at subsidy? India has always shunned away from it. Even during the COVID, India took, and it turned out to be a right call, not to sort of do handouts. But this is a situation, particularly for MSMEs. I think Premal made a very interesting point, which is that once you lose a customer to another country, getting that customer back becomes such a Herculean thing. How is it that one government can sort of handhold with those manufacturers to sort of mitigate the blow?
So, one situation is when there is that inherent tariff, how are you able to rejig supply chain pricing, etc.? We don't have today a central intellectual pool which the government has created, which anybody can sort of access. People will run around trying to look for this sort of advice, and most of the small players don't have access to the best advice. But I think we need to create a central pool of intellectual capital to just help navigate trade issues. Today you can dialogue with the Ministry of Commerce, but there is no facilitative mechanism, which as a small businessman, I can say, I have this tariff issue, help me with, XYZ. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is, can government help search new markets? So we had a very interesting situation where, trade data is available publicly. So we were seeing that in terms of bed mattresses in US, they were bringing either anti-dumping or safeguards or other measures whereby China will become non-competitive. Size of market was probably 8.2 billion. When it went away from China, nobody else had manufacturing capability of that scale. But if we track that opportunity and transposed it with our manufacturers, how much of that could we actually take over? Because this is not something which will come overnight, but it's predictive. You can see it is coming, and you can sort of position into
Navigate people to
to say this is where the opportunity is coming. And coming to subsidies, for a long time, subsidies was a bad word because they were actionable under WTO.
Correct.
If the multilateral mequism
It's not
now
there,
is
it
a
doesn't
thought and has no teeth, then quite honestly, we have to think of measures where people have, quite elegantly relabeled subsidies.
So
In some
previously,
form or
when you
manner.
go to see, previously the government used to have like interest equalization and certain things which were there, which I think should be brought onto the table very quickly instead of waiting. And our industry doesn't have any issue. We feel that the GST and the way they refund and the automation that they, at least in our industry, is far superior than we face. A problem actually is in customs, because the ICA portal is not at all efficient, and they're trying to upgrade it, but it's taking them too long. So there are a lot of things which the government could do just to make the business much quicker, and all these hidden costs go away at this particular moment.
Premal, any thoughts from your side? Yep.
I'd be very, very honest. We are somewhat disappointed. because when you have a problem which is not of your own making, and suddenly it hits you smack in the face, we did expect a little more handholding, but every time we approached the government, they said, ask us for anything but no subsidy. Now, unfortunately, in a time like this, when India would have saved maybe 17, $20 billion by buying cheaper oil, if at critical time a small percentage of that was made available to the industry in whatever form. You don't want to give direct subsidy, you give low interest rates, etc., etc. People are still paying off their COVID loans, by the way, because those were all long-term loans. Those are still not fully been paid off as of today. So we were expecting a little bit more because we are the largest employer after agriculture in the country. 45 million are directly engaged in the business of textiles and apparel. So we are the largest employer. We're the largest women employer in the country. And at this critical time, we did expect, but I think from the government's point of view, they sort of got a reality check. It made them move faster towards the EU free trade agreement, which was sort of dragging its feet. And perhaps there were back channel discussions with the US to sort of try. So maybe the government's approach was to resolve the problem rather than deal with it symptomatically. So perhaps they were right, but only time will tell. And it's not very easy because we always diversify the market. To to onboard a new customer in an existing market is difficult enough because the things need to get used. You get to get used to the entire. To get into a completely different market is a altogether different ball game. It takes minimum 6 months plus at the very minimum to start in a new country.
Also, Dinesh, my sense is these concepts of better tariffs and capacity building domestically are not mutually exclusive concepts.
Yeah.
They have to go hand in hand because no matter what tariff deal you secure, your ability to predict that it will sustain over a period of time, particularly with the US, may have question marks. So capacity building here is something which is inevitable, and I'm sure the government will focus on it. And there are a lot of these issues, and without getting into the country, you had a much smaller country which jigged its affair to say banks will give loans at so and so. And ultimately, that interest rate was charged on paper. Each industry came distress. There were arbitrations, the loans were written off, and the interest was written off. Can you find ways? Global history is full of nimbleness and sleight of hand where people have managed things.
Absolutely right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So coming on and moving on to the last topic, Rohan, we had the GST regime and moving of the 12% slab by and large to 5%, and then 18% and 40%. Whilst I'm aware that the moves to make this harmonization actually started 2 years ago, it is still perceived that government sort of reacted quickly because of the tariff, and you can't really do such a massive exercise in such a short time. But whether it was in response to tariff or not, how do you see this softening the blow, at least for some of the industries, by giving impetus to domestic consumption? What does this mean? How do you see things there?
My sense is undoubtedly there's going to be impetus, which will translate in the marketplace. And the one thing you are seeing is that these tariff cuts, while you have the anti-profiteering provision, and that's part of the law, but practically what you're seeing is literally every limb of government is working overtime to ensure that these reductions are translated into the pocket of the consumer. So you see the pharma industry, you are getting notifications telling you what to do. They are coming under the Legal Metrology Act. The NPPA under the DPCO is telling you. Everybody is moving to the common theme of saying, pass on the benefit to the pocket of the consumer. So that as a catalyst for what it will do to economic demand, I think certainly will be significant.
So we are at least hopeful because the more disposable income which is there with the Indian consumer, So part of the loss that we take from the US consumer, we'll be able to shift that at least over here for the time being. And with the growth story which is there in India, we see that the next 10 years, this decade, as far as jewelry is concerned, and especially with more disposable income in the hands of the consumer, that's the way it's going. We just hope it doesn't all go into gold.
Yeah, so that part of our economy which all the other nations are targeting, the expected 60 million middle class evolution, their consumption pattern, obviously the more we can get our people to sell into that, there is a story there. On GST, I just say that there are other two things which really need to come in. One, I think there needs to be just one principle of input tax credit. Every rupee of tax paid will become credit. Either you take credit or we will give you a refund. This whole situation of credit can get deadlocked for reason A, B, C, D just has to go. And the second is really intent. Every issue of interpretational divergence cannot become 15 years of litigation. You have interpretational divergence, you appoint a committee of whichever ex-judges of the Supreme Court, refer the issue, get a decision in 3 months, 6 months, end of story, you just move on. But today, every interpretational divergence is 15 years of litigation. You cannot have that litigious a tax system to say, go compete in the world.
No, very, very, very interesting. And to that extent,
I have a point on the GST, if I may interject, because for example, apparel, while most of the apparel has moved into 5%, garments costing over 2,500 are 18%. Now today, that's a very serious problem, because if the younger generation has to be aspirational, you have the wedding season, you have woolen clothing. So actually the overall costs are going to increase, because either you bring everything should be brought to one level. I can't understand how in the same product category you have, just because of the pricing, 5% to 18%. That needs to somehow get resolved. And what you said was very true. We believe that the GST cuts have been sort of accelerated because of the problems in trade. And I think this is also a precursor to some of the giveaways that we will give to European Union and the US, where we will reduce certain import duties, etc., etc. So we are reducing our taxes in anticipation of that.
agreed. Ron, you're making a point with regard to litigation, 15 years, and you are being charitable when you say 15. Actually, it's not maybe sometimes more than that. I think one thing which probably one could commend the government is that along with the GST amendments, the most thorny issue of intermediary services has got addressed, discounts issue has got addressed, and we do hope, as you rightly said, that the government understands that it needs to clarify. It can't be that there's, and there was one other point, Rohan, which is that we of course now have the appellate tribunal come in, and hopefully it will start functioning and delivering. But this multiplicity of judgments coming across, diverse conclusions. You and I had discussed in a different context, Rohan, where a judgment came which was inconsistent with the government's own stand, and therefore stymieing the entire industry, which really the government was trying to promote. Somewhere on the line, and maybe tax is just one aspect of it, but this judicial system and judicial reforms is sort of critical to ease of doing business.
Absolutely. And you rightly mentioned intermediary, which was an issue which has been contentious for a long time. Discounts. If you list all the key contentious issues, you will not get beyond 40 issues. If you take 40 issues and set your mind to say that over the next 6 months, with the best legal advice, in a balanced manner, we will clarify 40 issues. Maybe there will be another 3 issues in the pipeline and maybe another 3 thereafter. But if at one go you take away the 40 critical issues today, you start on a clean slate, predictability in tax collection, no litigation, and every 3 months, whatever is coming up, you clarify it. really the need of the hour is at least ongoing. Litigation in taxation is something that they have to seriously focus on eliminating because, understand one thing also, GST is an indirect tax. I should pay it and pass on. If GST becomes a business cost, because the demand will come later, I'll pay the demand, I'll pay the interest, I'll pay the penalty. How can a business survive that cost? This is an indirect tax, I should pay and pass. Whatever it is, I should pay and pass.
Rohan, you seem to be carried away and forgetting the thing that you are a senior counsel.
Senior counsel in the right cause.
So thank you. I thought we covered quite a bit today. We spoke about how FTAs get negotiated, got an insight into where things are moving. We looked at the UK FTA. We looked at the US and how businesses are rejigging themselves and what is it that needs to do. We spoke a bit about what the government can do to sort of mitigate the entire impact, and then finally the GST and its impact on consumption. One quick last word from all three of you. Premal, you want to go first?
I think what Rohan says makes a lot of sense. Simplification is what we need, because if this country has to grow, then we need to be freed from the shackles that we currently are embroiled, So somehow, if there is a simplification that can come, that would be the greatest boon that the government can do to the industry. Just how it's like tying my hand and asking me to fight. So on one side, that is what it is. Otherwise, I think overall India's story seems to be intact. My industry is extremely bullish with the FTAs that are likely to happen in the very near future. And if they do come, then you would see a quantum leap in our apparel exports. And currently from 16 billion, we could reach 30 billion in a matter of 3 years. If all the things happen right, and that means that much more employment will be generated.
Thank you.
Anup? As far as we are concerned, we are looking at other markets and we are hoping that China comes back and spread and not depend so much on the US jewelry consumer. But that's going to happen naturally with India and China both coming back. Anyway, our prediction is that US will go from 50% down to 25-30% consumption, and the rest would be all in the Middle East and India and China. So yes, we have a little bit of pain for the next couple of months until this is signed off, but long term looks, we can diversify pretty fast.
Rohan?
Yeah, I think really we should use this crisis as the catalyst to sort of reinvent in the right way, far more in terms of self-sufficiency, far more in terms of our own capacitance. And if we do that, that will serve us best in the long run. The other thing is, in fairness to government, I think what is otherwise a very sunny sky in terms of all the FTAs, the US cloud is just hidden the sun. Yeah, let's not sort of forget everything else which has happened. And it's a cloud which will pass, and it's an unpredictable cloud. It may come back, but now we should be used to the fact that it'll come and go.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Rohan, for making this time. Anup, Premal, thank you for providing the industry perspective. We enjoyed bringing this to all of you. I hope all of you listeners had a good time, good insight into the policy framework and the practical aspects that one can do to mitigate what is otherwise a challenging time. Thank you all, and thank you, FICCI, for providing us this platform and opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Have a good evening.